The air in the private hospital room was a sterile cocktail of antiseptic, wilting roses and the faint, cloying scent of fear. For 3 days, Leo had breathed it in, making it the very essence of his existence. He had sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, its vinyl cool against his tired skin, and watched the rhythmic rise and fall of his wife's chest. Clara. Her name was a prayer on his lips, a constant, silent mantra against the beeping and whirring of the machines that tethered her to the world of the living. The surgery had been a success, a complex, high-risk procedure to remove a tumor that had coiled itself around her spine like a serpent. The doctors, titans in their field, had spoken of miracles and millimeters. Leo had spoken only to the universe, offering bargains he had no power to make, promising pieces of his soul in exchange for hers. He'd held her hand before they wheeled her away, her fingers cold and trembling in his. "Don't worry," he'd said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her sea of terror. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." And he hadn't. He slept in the chair, ate tasteless cafeteria food, and filled the silence with soft reassurances whenever she stirred. Her family, her imperious mother Eleanor, her bluff, dismissive father Marcus, and her slick, perpetually smirking brother Julian had made appearances. They would sweep in their expensive colognes and perfumes and assault on the room's fragile sanctity, offer platitudes, and look at Leo with a familiar, weary condescension. They saw him as they always had, the earnest, slightly too quiet architect. Good solid Leo. Reliable Leo. The man who was punching far above his weight by being married to their dazzling Clara, and who should therefore be grateful for any scraps of attention they threw his way. They saw his exhaustion, the dark circles under his eyes, the rumpled state of his clothes, and they saw confirmation of his inadequacy. He was struggling, they thought. The cost of the surgery, the best surgeons, this top-tier private room, it must be crushing him. Julian had even clapped him on the shoulder with faux sympathy. "Hang in there, old man. Let me know if you need to borrow a few quid to keep the lights on. Wouldn't want Clara coming home to a dark house, eh?" Leo had merely nodded, his face a placid mask. Now, on the third day, she was waking up. The nurse had just reduced the sedation, and Clara's eyelids began to flutter. Leo leaned forward, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He smoothed the hair back from her pale, damp forehead. "Clara? Honey, can you hear me?" Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, blinked open. They were cloudy, unfocused. Her lips parted, dry and cracked. She tried to speak, but only a faint rasp emerged. He held a cup with a straw to her lips, and she took a small, difficult sip of water. "Leo," she breathed. Her voice was a ghost of its usual confident melody. "I'm here," he said, his own voice thick with relief. "I'm right here. You're okay. Everything's okay." She blinked again, her gaze slowly clearing. A flicker of recognition, a small, weak smile touched her lips. He felt a wave of love so powerful it almost buckled his knees. All the worry, all the sleepless nights, it was all worth it for this moment. She was back. She tried to lift her hand, but it was too heavy. He took it in both of his, pressing his lips to her knuckles. Her eyes held his, and she seemed to be gathering her strength for a monumental effort. He leaned closer, ready to hear her first words of love, of gratitude, of shared victory over the darkness. She moistened her lips again. The whisper, when it came, was so faint he almost missed it. It was a thread of sound, meant only for him, a secret shared in the sacred space of her return to consciousness. "You have to call Julian," she breathed, her brow furrowed with a strange, urgent anxiety. Tell him the plan is safe." The world stopped. The beeping of the heart monitor seemed to fade into a distant hum. The sterile air thickened, choking him. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold tide receding and leaving him utterly exposed. The plan, Julian. The words didn't compute. They were puzzle pieces from a different box, jagged and wrong. He must have misheard. The medication, the trauma, she was confused. "What, honey?" he asked, forcing a gentle tone, praying he had imagined it. "What plan?" Her eyes, now disturbingly clear, held a flash of something he had never seen directed at him before. Annoyance, impatience. "Don't be dense, Leo," she whispered, the words stronger this time, sharper. "The insurance, the house. Just call Julian. He'll know." And then her eyes slid shut, her breathing evening out as the remnants of the anesthetic pulled her back under. Leo remained frozen, his hand still holding hers. But the warmth he had felt moments before was gone. Her hand was just a hand. The woman in the bed was just a woman. The room was a tomb. "The plan is safe." The words echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of his chest. He looked at her peaceful, sleeping face, the face he had worshipped, the face he had sketched from memory 1,000 times. And for the first time, he realized he was looking at a stranger he had just mortgaged his entire world to save. He slowly, deliberately let go of her hand. The slight sound of their skin separating was like the snap of a bone. He stood up, his movements stiff, robotic. He walked to the window and stared out at the sprawling city below. A city he had helped to shape with his designs, a city full of secrets. He had thought he and Clara had no secrets. Now, he understood they had only secrets. His exhaustion vanished, replaced by a clarity so sharp and cold, it felt like a shard of ice in his heart. Julian, her smirking, contemptuous brother, the man who called him old man and offered him pocket money. They had a plan, and whatever it was, it had been important enough to be her first thought upon waking. More important than, "I love you." More important than, "Thank you." More important than, "I was so scared." The plan is safe. It was a statement of conspiracy, a confirmation of a shared goal. And in that moment, Leo understood with chilling certainty that he was not part of that goal. He was the obstacle, or worse, the means to achieve it. He had been a tool, and a tool, once it has served its purpose, is discarded. He stood there for a long time, watching the cars move like tiny, insignificant insects, and he felt a profound shift within him. The man who had entered this hospital 3 days ago, the loving, worried husband, was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone patient, someone methodical, someone who had just been handed a map to a betrayal so deep it defied comprehension. And he would follow it. He would follow it all the way to its bitter, ruinous end. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception, though only one person in the room was aware of the performance. Leo resumed his role as the devoted husband. He spoke to the doctors, coordinated with the nurses, and managed the steady stream of visitors. When Clara was more lucid, he read to her from her favorite novels, his voice even and calm, a soothing balm on the surface of a poisoned well. He would look at her, and she would smile back, a genuine smile of a patient recovering under the care of a loved one. She had no memory of her whispered confession. The drugs, the doctors confirmed, could cause temporary amnesia, hallucinations, confusion. She remembered nothing between the pre-op room and waking up properly a day later. That single, devastating moment was his alone to carry. It was a secret he held close, a cold, hard stone in his gut. Her family continued their visits, their dynamic unchanged. Eleanor would critique the hospital's flower arrangements, while Marcus would loudly discuss his stock portfolio on his phone in the hallway. And Julian was the most revealing. He would saunter in, a picture of tailored confidence, and his eyes would immediately find Clara's. They shared looks, quick, furtive, but charged with an unspoken communication that Leo could now see as clearly as if it were a written message. Julian would then turn his attention to Leo, his condescension now tinged with something new. a smug, proprietary air. "Still holding down the fort, Leo?" he'd say, clapping him on the back again. "Good man. Clara's a lucky girl." The words were a mockery. "By the way," he added one afternoon, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "about the final hospital bill, don't you worry about it. We'll figure something out. The family will step in. Wouldn't want you to have to sell that little car of yours." Leo drove a modest 10-year-old sedan. It was practical, reliable, and completely anonymous. To the Vance family, it was the perfect symbol of his station in life. Unremarkable. They had no idea he owned a climate-controlled garage an hour outside the city that housed a collection of vintage sports cars, each one a masterpiece of engineering he had lovingly restored. His little car was a deliberate choice, a piece of camouflage. "Thank you, Julian," Leo replied, his expression one of humble gratitude. "That's very generous." He watched as Julian's gaze flickered to Clara, a shared smirk passing between them. They believed him. They believed in the narrative they had constructed. Leo, the struggling architect, forever in their debt, financially and socially. He had let them believe it for years. When he and Clara had first met, he had already achieved significant, if quiet, success. He'd founded his own architectural firm, focusing on innovative, sustainable designs that won prestigious, low-publicity awards within the industry. His clients were discreet, incredibly wealthy individuals and corporations who valued his talent and his lack of interest in fame. He made more in a year than the entire Vance family, with their gaudy displays of inherited wealth, did in 5. But Clara had been drawn to the idea of a starving artist. She'd loved the romance of his supposed struggle. "We'll build our empire together," she had said, and he, besotted, had found it charming. He'd never corrected her. He bought a modest house in a respectable but not opulent neighborhood. He dressed in well-made but unassuming clothes. He allowed her and her family to believe his firm was a small, boutique operation that was perpetually on the verge of landing a big break. He had thought it was a harmless game, a way to ensure she loved him for who he was, not for his wealth. Now he saw it for what it was, the perfect cover for their contempt. He hadn't hidden his wealth to test her love. He had hidden it, and in doing so, had given them the rope to hang themselves. The cost of the surgery, which Julian so casually offered to help with, had been astronomical. Leo had paid the deposit, a sum that would have choked Marcus Vance, without blinking. He had arranged for the top neurosurgeon in the country to be flown in, along with his team. He had secured the best private suite in the hospital. He told Clara it was all covered by a specialized insurance policy he had taken out years ago. It was a lie, of course. He had simply written a check. Her family had accepted this explanation without question, because the alternative, that Leo possessed the kind of liquidity to handle such an expense effortlessly, was unthinkable to them. Their worldview was built on a pyramid of status, and Leo was firmly at the bottom. To imagine him at the top would be to shatter the very foundation of their identities. One evening after Julian had left, Clara squeezed Leo's hand. She was getting stronger now, the color returning to her cheeks. "You know," she said, her voice soft and earnest, "Julian can be a bit of a peacock, but he has a good heart. He's so worried about you, about us, about the financial strain of all this." Leo looked into her clear blue eyes, searching for any sign of duplicity. He found none. She was a phenomenal actress. Or, more chillingly, she believed her own lies. "We'll be fine," he said, the words tasting like ash. "As long as I have you, we'll be fine." She smiled, a radiant, happy smile. "I know. It's just the house. We were so close to starting the build. I know we'll have to put it on hold now. Maybe for years," she sighed dramatically. "It's my dream house, Leo. Our dream house." The house. This was the second part of her whispered message. For 2 years, Leo had been designing it, a sprawling, modernist marvel of glass, steel, and reclaimed wood, perched on a piece of land he had bought with sweeping views of the ocean. He had poured his heart into the design, customizing every detail to Clara's stated desires. A huge walk-in closet for her, a yoga studio with a view of the sea, a professional-grade kitchen. He had presented her with the final blueprints just a month before her diagnosis. She had cried, telling him it was more than she had ever imagined. He'd told her they would have to finance it carefully, that it would stretch them to their limit. Another lie. He could have paid for it in cash 10 times over. The land was already his, free and clear. The construction funds were sitting in a dedicated account. "Don't worry about the house," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of gentle reassurance. "We'll find a way. Dreams are important." "You're the best, Leo," she murmured, closing her eyes. "So steady, so reliable." He sat back in his chair, the vinyl creaking in the quiet room. Steady, reliable. These were the words one used to describe a sturdy piece of furniture, a dependable appliance. Not a husband, not a partner. He was an asset, a resource, and he was beginning to understand the full nature of the plan. The insurance, she had whispered. His life insurance, perhaps? Had they hoped the stress of her illness and the financial ruin would finish him off? Or was it the insurance payout from the house, if something were to happen to it? And the house itself, it was his design on his land, but she called it her dream house. He had a sickening feeling that in her mind, and in Julian's, the house was already theirs, and he was merely the inconvenient architect who came with it. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, and his fingers brushed against a small, hard-edged object. It was a simple, elegant flash drive encased in brushed steel. It contained every email, every text message, every financial transaction, every blueprint, every secret he had. He had started compiling it all the day after her surgery. It was his own plan, and unlike theirs, it was built on a foundation of undeniable truth. He was just waiting for the right moment to break ground. When Clara was discharged, the Vance family orchestrated her return home as if it were a royal procession. Eleanor had hired a cleaning service to deep clean the house, an implicit criticism of Leo's own housekeeping. Marcus had arranged for a private car service, waving away Leo's modest sedan with a dismissive gesture. "Clara needs to be comfortable, Leo. Your car, well, it's just not suitable." Julian, of course, was the master of ceremonies, directing everything, his arm possessively around Clara's shoulders as he guided her through the front door. Leo followed in their wake, carrying the bags, the prescriptions, the discharge paperwork. He was the porter, the valet, the background staff. He entered his own home and found it subtly changed. New, ostentatious bouquets of flowers were everywhere, their scent overpowering. Throw pillows he had never seen before, in garish shades of gold and purple, were plumped on the sofa. Eleanor was in the kitchen, directing a caterer she had hired to stock the fridge. "Leo, darling," she said, not looking at him, "I do hope you don't mind. Hospital food is so dreadful, and Clara needs to build up her strength. I wasn't sure you'd know what to get." "This is very thoughtful, Eleanor," Leo said, his voice betraying no emotion. He placed the bags on the floor. His eyes scanned the room. They were nesting. They were marking their territory. The weeks that followed settled into a grinding routine of humiliation. Clara, freed from the hospital, quickly shed the vulnerability of a patient and donned the entitlement of a queen. Her recovery became the central, organizing principle of the household, and Leo was its chief servant. Her bell, a small silver thing Julian had bought her as a joke, tinkled from the bedroom at all hours. He needed to fetch her tea. He needed to adjust her pillows. He needed to find a specific magazine. He needed to rub her feet. He performed each task with quiet efficiency. His compliance was not born of love, not anymore. It was strategic. Every act of servitude was a deposit in a bank of grievances. He was giving them every opportunity to reveal the full depth of their disdain, and they did not disappoint. Julian was a near constant presence. He would arrive mid-morning, dressed in expensive casual wear, and settle in as if he owned the place. He and Clara would spend hours talking in low voices, their heads close together. When Leo entered the room, they would fall silent, smiling at him with a strained brightness that was more insulting than any glare. One afternoon, Leo was in his home office, a small, spare room that the Vances regarded as his little hobby space, reviewing structural calculations for a new commercial tower his firm was designing. He had his headphones on, listening to a complex piece of classical music, a habit that helped him focus. He was so absorbed he didn't hear them enter. He felt a tap on his shoulder and pulled off his headphones. Julian and Clara were standing behind him, looking at the large monitor displaying the intricate 3D model. "Still tinkering with your little buildings, Leo?" Julian asked, a smirk playing on his lips. He gestured at the screen. "What's this one? A dollhouse for a rich client?" Clara laughed, a light tinkling sound that grated on Leo's nerves. "Oh, be nice, Julian. Leo works very hard on his projects." Her defense was worse than the insult. It was the kind of thing one said about a child's macaroni art project. "I'm just saying," Julian continued, leaning over Leo's shoulder, his expensive cologne filling the air. "It's a tough business, especially for a small-timer. Look, I've been talking to Clara. With all the medical bills piling up, maybe it's time to be realistic. My friend's father runs a big construction firm. I could probably get you a job there. Project manager, something like that. Stable salary, good benefits, no more worrying about chasing clients." The offer hung in the air, a monument to their arrogance. They were offering him a job, a salaried position. To them, this was an act of supreme generosity, a lifeline thrown to their drowning, inadequate brother-in-law. They had no concept of the fact that the big construction firm Julian mentioned was a frequent bidder on contracts for projects Leo's own firm designed. The owner of that firm had taken Leo to lunch just last month, practically begging to be the primary contractor for his next 3 developments. Leo slowly turned in his chair to face them. He looked at Clara, who was watching him with an expectant, hopeful expression. She truly believed this was a good idea. She believed he needed this. He saw the future they had planned for him. A neutered, salaried employee, his ambitions curtailed, his hobby put aside for the serious business of being a provider in a way they could understand and control. He would be permanently indebted, permanently lesser. "Thank you, Julian," Leo said, his voice perfectly level. "I appreciate the offer. I'll certainly give it some thought." "Good man," Julian said, satisfied. He draped his arm around Clara's waist. "See, he's a practical guy when he needs to be. Come on, sis, let's leave the genius to his work." They left the room, their laughter echoing in the hallway. Leo turned back to his monitor. The complex, beautiful structure on the screen seemed to mock him. He had designed buildings that reshaped skylines, that won awards for their harmony of form and function. And in his own home, he was being offered a pity job. He closed his eyes, his hands clenching into fists under the desk. "Patience," he told himself. "The foundation is almost set. The demolition is not far off." That evening, he went to his desk and took out a simple, leather-bound folio. It was old, the leather soft and worn at the edges. It had been a gift from his mentor, a legendary architect who had seen his potential early on. Inside, he began to place documents. The first was the deed to the oceanfront land, in his name only. The second was a printout of the bank account holding the construction funds, its balance containing more zeros than Julian had likely ever seen in one place. The third was a copy of the wire transfer to the surgeon's private practice. He then added a new document, a detailed record he had started keeping of every condescending remark, every belittling gesture, every single time the silver bell had tinkled. He wrote down Julian's job offer, verbatim. It was his list of grievances, a testament. He closed the folio. It felt heavy in his hands, weighted with the truth. It was his symbolic object, his hidden power. And soon, very soon, he was going to open it for them to see. The humiliations began to compound, each one layering on top of the last, building a structure of contempt so solid Leo could almost see it. It was in the way Eleanor would rearrange his books, sighing as if his taste were a personal affront. It was in the way Marcus would turn to Julian to discuss finances, pointedly excluding Leo from the conversation as if he were a child. It was in Clara's casual assumption that he would handle all the chores, the shopping, the cooking, because his work, in her eyes, was less important, less real than her recovery. The breaking point, the moment that solidified Leo's resolve and set the date for his final confrontation, came on a Saturday evening. The Vances had decided to host a small, welcome-back dinner for Clara. Not at their own sprawling home, but at Leo and Clara's house. The logic, as Eleanor explained it, was that it would be less taxing for Clara. The reality, Leo knew, was that it was a power play. It was a demonstration of their complete colonization of his space. Leo was relegated to the role of host and cater-waiter. He grilled steaks in the backyard, while Marcus and Julian drank his best single-malt scotch, a bottle he had been saving for a special occasion. They didn't ask. They just took it. Julian swirled the amber liquid in his glass, holding it up to the light. "Decent stuff, Leo. Pick it up on sale?" "Something like that," Leo said, flipping the steaks. The smoke stung his eyes. Inside, Eleanor was holding court with a few of Clara's friends. Leo could hear snippets of their conversation through the open kitchen window. They were talking about summer travel plans, the Hamptons, a villa in Tuscany. Then he heard his name. It was Eleanor's voice carrying clearly on the evening air. "Oh, it's been such a worry, the expense of it all. Leo is trying his best, of course. He's a good man, very steady. But his little firm is just not equipped for this kind of thing. We're all having to rally around them." A friend's voice, dripping with pity. "That's what family is for. Clara is so lucky to have you all." "Well, we do what we must," Eleanor said with a theatrical sigh. "Julian is even trying to find him a more stable position. We just want them to be secure. It's hard when your daughter marries for, well, for love, and not for stability." The implication was clear and brutal. He was a charity case, a romantic folly Clara had indulged in, and which her family now had to pay for. The steaks sizzled on the grill. Leo's hand holding the tongs was perfectly still. He felt a strange, cold calm settle over him. This was it. This was the final piece of evidence he needed. It wasn't just about Julian and Clara anymore. It was the entire family. They were a single entity, a hive mind of arrogance and condescension. He served the dinner with an impassive face. He poured the wine. He cleared the plates. He endured the patronizing questions about his work. Throughout the meal, Clara was radiant. She was the star of the show, recounting her brave battle, soaking in the sympathy and admiration. She would occasionally glance at Leo, offering him a small, dismissive smile, the kind a queen might offer to a loyal but insignificant courtier. She was so comfortable in her role, so certain of her position at the center of this universe they had created. At one point, the conversation turned to the house, the dream house by the sea. "Such a shame it will have to wait," one of her friends said. Clara sighed, placing a delicate hand on her chest. "I know, with everything that's happened, Leo's business being what it is, it's just not realistic right now. Our priorities have to shift." She looked at Leo, a hint of challenge in her eyes. "Don't they, darling?" She was testing him, daring him to contradict her, to make promises he couldn't keep, so she could look at her friends with a look that said, "See what I have to manage?" Leo simply nodded. "Your health is the only priority," he said. Julian, sitting at the head of the table, Leo's seat, raised his glass. To health, he toasted, and to family, for picking up the slack where it's needed. Everyone drank, their eyes filled with pity for Leo. They were toasting his failure, his inadequacy. They were celebrating their own perceived magnanimity. After everyone had left and the house was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher, Clara came up behind him as he stood looking out the dark living room window. She wrapped her arms around his waist. It was a nice night, wasn't it? It's so good to feel normal again. Yes, it was, he said, his body rigid in her embrace. Don't be upset about what everyone was saying, she said, her voice soft. They're just worried. They love us. And my family, they're going to help us. Julian is serious about that job, you know. It could be the best thing for us. Stability, security. We wouldn't have to worry about the house anymore. He slowly turned to face her. Her face was earnest, her eyes pleading. She actually believed she was helping him, guiding him toward a better, safer life. A life curated and approved by the Vances. The sheer, breathtaking blindness of it all was what finally broke through his calm. It wasn't just malice. It was a fundamental inability to see him as a complete, capable human being. I think, Leo said, his voice quiet but firm, that it's time we all had a talk. You, me, your parents, and Julian. A proper talk about our future, about everything. A flicker of alarm crossed her face. A talk? What kind of talk? A financial planning meeting, he said, choosing his words carefully. To get everything out on the table, the cost of the surgery, the future of my business, the house, all of it. I think it's important that we're all on the same page. Relief washed over her features. Of course. Practical, reliable Leo wanted to have a practical meeting. He was probably going to formally ask her family for help. It was all going according to their plan. That's a wonderful idea, she said, beaming. So responsible. I'll call them tomorrow. We can do it this week. Oh, Leo, this is such a relief. I knew you'd see reason. She kissed him on the cheek and went upstairs to bed, humming happily. Leo remained in the dark living room. He walked over to the small, antique writing desk in the corner. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out the leather folio. He held it in his hands. It felt like a weapon now. He had set the stage. He had invited them to their own execution. He would give them one final, glorious opportunity to underestimate him. And then he would open the book and read them their judgment. The day of the meeting arrived, cloaked in a tense, expectant atmosphere. Clara had arranged it for a Wednesday evening. She'd framed it to her family as Leo's official presentation of their financial situation. They arrived exactly on time, a united front of smug superiority. Marcus, in a crisp suit, looked like a CEO arriving to inspect a failing subsidiary. Eleanor was dressed in pearls and a silk blouse, her expression one of pained tolerance. And Julian? Julian was practically vibrating with triumph. He had a leather-trimmed binder under his arm, presumably filled with his own solutions to Leo's problems, including the contact information for the pity job. They gathered in the living room, the same room where Leo had been mocked just days before. Clara fussed, offering drinks, plumping the offensive gold pillows. She was playing the role of the supportive wife, gently guiding her hapless husband through a difficult but necessary ordeal. Leo remained quiet, standing by the fireplace. On the mantelpiece, he had placed the worn leather folio. It sat there, unassuming, yet it was the most powerful object in the room. "All right, Leo," Marcus began, taking the seat at the head of the invisible table, just as Julian had. "Clara tells us you wanted to lay out the situation for us. So, let's have it. What's the damage? How bad is it?" Julian opened his binder with a flourish. "Don't worry, Dad. I've run some numbers based on what I imagine a guy in Leo's position makes. I've got a few strategies here. A bit of debt consolidation, A 5-year austerity plan. It'll be tough, but we can get you through it, Leo. Leo looked at each of them. He saw the condescension in Marcus's eyes, the pity in Eleanor's, the predatory glee in Julian's. He looked at Clara, and he saw a willful blindness, a desperate need for this narrative to be true. They were so confident, so utterly sure of themselves and of his place beneath them. It was perfect. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, a quiet before the storm. He let them sit in their certainty. He watched Julian tap his pen impatiently against his binder. He saw Marcus check his expensive watch. Finally, Leo moved. He walked to the fireplace, his movements calm and deliberate. He picked up the leather folio. He held it in both hands, feeling the familiar weight of the worn leather. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice low and steady, yet it commanded the room. The tapping of Julian's pen stopped. Clara was right. I did want to have a meeting to get everything out on the table, to ensure we are all on the same page about the future. He paused, letting his eyes travel from face to face. "However," he continued, "I think you may have misunderstood the purpose of this meeting. I didn't call you here to ask for your help. I called you here to inform you of my decisions." A subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. The smugness wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Marcus frowned. "Decisions? What decisions?" Leo didn't answer him directly. Instead, he looked at Clara. "You've been worried about the cost of your surgery," he said. "You all have. You believe it has placed us on the brink of financial ruin." "Well, obviously," Julian scoffed. "A procedure like that, the top doctors, it costs a fortune. There's no shame in admitting you're in over your head, Leo." "You're right," Leo said, his voice dangerously soft. "It did cost a fortune." He opened the folio. The first document on top was a single sheet of paper. He held it up. "This is the final consolidated invoice from the hospital and the surgical team. The total cost was $1.2 million. A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor put a hand to her chest. Clara's face went white. 1.2 million. The number was beyond their comprehension. It was a figure of absolute catastrophe. "My God," Marcus whispered, his face pale. "Leo, that's impossible. You're ruined." Julian looked simultaneously horrified and vindicated. "I told you," he breathed, looking at his parents. "He's completely sunk." He then looked at Leo with a new kind of pity, the kind one gives to a man whose life is effectively over. "Leo, it's okay. We'll figure it out. We'll have to sell the house, obviously, liquidate everything, but the family will do nothing," Leo cut in, his voice like steel. The interruption was so sharp, so out of character, that Julian physically recoiled. Leo placed the invoice back in the folio and took out a second document. It was a bank statement. "You seem to be under the impression that I am a man of modest means," Leo said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "An impression I have, admittedly, allowed you to maintain. For years I have allowed you to believe I am a struggling artist, a small-timer, a man in need of your guidance and your charity." He walked over to Marcus and placed the bank statement on the table in front of him. "Marcus, you're a man who understands numbers. Please, read the closing balance on that account, out loud." Marcus stared at Leo, confused, then down at the paper. His eyes scanned the page. He stopped. His jaw went slack. He looked back up at Leo, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked back at the paper. "No," he whispered. This is a mistake." "Read it," Leo commanded. Marcus swallowed hard. His voice was a choked rasp. "Closing balance? 18,426,000. He couldn't finish. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was the sound of a world breaking. Eleanor snatched the paper from her husband's trembling hands. Her eyes widened. her perfectly made-up face crumbling in shock. Julian shot up from his chair and grabbed the statement, his face contorted in a snarl of disbelief. "What is this? Where did you get this? Is this some kind of joke?" "That," Leo said calmly, "is one of my liquid investment accounts. It's the one I used to pay for the surgery. I didn't use insurance, Clara. There was no specialized policy. I simply wrote a check. The $1.2 million was transferred 3 weeks ago. As you can see, the account has barely registered the dip." He turned his gaze on Clara. Her face was ashen. She was staring at him as if he had suddenly grown a second head. The man she thought she knew, the man she could control and pity, was evaporating before her very eyes. "My little firm?" Leo continued, his voice dripping with irony. "Last year, my firm, Vantage Point Architecture, billed just over $30 million in design and consultation fees. The commercial tower I was tinkering with the other day, that's a $1 billion development in Dubai. My fee alone is 8 figures. The pity job you wanted to get me, Julian? I had lunch with the CEO of that company last month. He spent the entire lunch trying to convince me to make his firm the exclusive builder for my next 5 projects. I turned him down. Each sentence was a hammer blow, systematically dismantling the reality they had built for themselves. He let the information sink in, watching their faces cycle through shock, denial, and a dawning, horrified understanding. "The car I drive," Leo went on, his voice relentless, "is a choice. My clothes are a choice. This house is a choice. It was all a choice, a test, one you have all failed in the most spectacular fashion." He paused, then walked back to the mantelpiece and retrieved the folio. "And then there is the matter of the dream house." He looked directly at Clara, whose eyes were now filling with tears of confusion and fear. "You were right to be concerned we couldn't afford it," he said. "A house like that is expensive." He pulled 2 more documents from the folio. "This is the deed to the 40 acres of coastline property it was to be built on. As you can see, it was purchased 2 years ago. By me. The title is in my name, solely." He placed it on the table. "And this," he said, producing another statement, "is the segregated construction fund for the project. As you can see, there is $25 million in it, more than enough to build our dream house without touching our other assets." He looked at Clara, his eyes cold. "Our dream house. That's what you called it. But it was never really our dream, was it, Clara?" This was the moment, the quiet bomb he had been waiting to detonate. "The night of the surgery," he said, his voice dropping, becoming intimate, chilling. "You were waking up. You were groggy from the anesthetic. I was holding your hand, and you whispered something to me. Do you remember what you said, Clara?" She shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. "No, I was on so many drugs, Leo." "You were," he agreed, "and in that state the truth came out. Your first thought upon returning to the world was not for me. It was not for us. It was for your brother." He turned his piercing gaze on Julian, who looked like a cornered animal. "You said, 'You have to call Julian. Tell him the plan is safe.'" Leo let the words hang in the dead air of the room. He saw the flash of pure terror in Julian's eyes, the utter collapse in Clara's. Marcus and Eleanor just stared, uncomprehending. "The plan," Leo repeated, his voice a venomous whisper. "I've been wondering about that plan. At first I thought I misheard. Then I thought you were just confused. But your behavior since coming home, your family's behavior, it has all made the picture so wonderfully clear." He took a step toward Clara. "The plan wasn't just to live off my wealth, was it? It was to take it. The house, built on my land with my money, would have been marital property. And Julian, ever the helpful brother, what was his role? To manage the process? To help you secure it all in a divorce once the house was built and my purpose was served?" "No!" Clara cried, a desperate, strangled sob. "Leo, no, it wasn't like that." Wasn't it? Leo's voice was merciless. He turned to Julian. And what about the insurance, Julian? She mentioned insurance. Was that part of the plan too? Were you two hoping the stress of it all would give me a heart attack? Or was there a more direct approach planned for later? A tragic accident at the new cliffside property, perhaps? This is insane, Julian blustered, finding his voice. You're paranoid. Clara was sick. She was rambling. Was she? Leo replied, his calm unshakable. He pulled one last set of papers from the folio. They were printouts of text messages. I have been a fool, but I am not stupid. After that day in the hospital, I hired a private investigator. A very good one. It turns out when you're worried your wife and brother-in-law are conspiring against you, you can find out a lot, especially when they are careless. He tossed the papers onto the coffee table in front of them. These are texts between you, Julian, and a real estate lawyer specializing in contentious divorces. The subject? Strategies for asset division in high net worth marriages with significant premarital assets. You were researching how to strip me of everything that wasn't protected by a prenup, which we don't have because I foolishly believed we were partners. He then threw down a second stack of papers. These were different. They were emails. And these are more personal. These are emails between you, Clara, and Julian. Planning your future, a future in my house, a future funded by my money, a future that did not include me. There are even discussions about what to do with my little studio after I was gone. The room was silent save for Clara's ragged sobs. Marcus had sunk into his chair, his face gray, looking 20 years older. Eleanor was staring at her children, her expression one of dawning horror. She was finally seeing them not as her brilliant, ambitious children, but as they truly were, petty, grasping criminals. Leo looked at Clara, his heart a cold, dead weight in his chest. The love he had felt for her was gone, burned away by the acid of her betrayal. In its place was only a vast, aching pity. You had it all, he said, his voice quiet again. You had a husband who loved you, who would have given you anything in the world. But it wasn't enough. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a prize. You wanted to win. You and your brother, you saw me as a mark, a fool to be played. He closed the leather folio, the sound of the cover shutting echoing like a cell door slamming. The game is over. He turned to Julian, whose face was a mask of hatred and fear. You offered me a job, Julian. I'm going to have to decline, but I have a counteroffer. I suggest you find a very, very good lawyer, because my lawyers, the ones who handle my billion-dollar contracts, will be in touch. We will be discussing fraud, conspiracy, and several other interesting topics. The evidence, as you can see, is quite comprehensive. He then looked at Marcus and Eleanor. You have enabled this. You have fostered this culture of arrogance and greed in your children. You look down on me because I did not fit your shallow definition of success. You are as culpable as they are. Finally, he looked back at his wife, the woman he had saved, the woman who had planned his ruin. Clara, he said, and her name was like a foreign word on his tongue. I will not be divorcing you. A tiny, insane flicker of hope sparked in her eyes. Divorce is for partners whose journey has come to an end, he clarified, extinguishing that spark with brutal precision. We were never partners. I will be seeking an annulment on the grounds of fraud. This marriage, this entire relationship, was predicated on a lie. It never truly existed. You will leave this house tomorrow. You will take only the things you brought with you when we met. Everything else, the furniture, the art, the life you thought you had, was purchased with my money, and it will remain. You are not entitled to any of it. He walked to the front door and opened it. The cool night air rushed in. Now get out, he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. All of you, get out of my house. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic tableau of disbelief and desperation. For a moment, no one moved. They were frozen, like figures in a photograph snapped at the instant of impact. Then, the scene fractured into motion. Clara was the first to break. She stumbled forward, falling to her knees before him, grabbing at the leg of his trousers. "Leo, please," she sobbed, her voice shredded. "Please don't do this. I love you. I do. I love you. It was Julian. He twisted everything. He put ideas in my head." Leo looked down at her, at the beautiful face now contorted with panic, and felt nothing. The love had been so completely hollowed out that there was not even an echo left. "Love?" he said, the word tasting like poison. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You love the idea of what I can provide. You love the idea of being a struggling artist muse. And when that grew tiresome, you were more than ready to transition to loving the idea of being a wealthy man's widow. The only person you have ever loved, Clara, is yourself." He gently but firmly detached her hand from his leg. "The time for lies is over." Julian, seeing his sister's pleading fail, switched tactics from denial to aggression. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. "You think you can just throw us out? You think you're so high and mighty with your secret money? This is Clara's home. We have rights." "You have no rights here," Leo stated calmly. "This is my property. You are trespassing. And as for Clara's home, she will soon discover that the law is quite clear on marriages entered into under fraudulent pretenses. She is entitled to nothing." He pulled his phone from his pocket. "I can either call the police and have you removed for trespassing, or you can leave under your own power. The choice is yours. You have 10 seconds to make it." It was Marcus who finally acted. His face was a ruin of shame and shock. He looked at his son, at the pathetic, blustering display, and then at Leo, who stood by the open door, a figure of implacable judgment. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been inverted with tectonic violence. He, Marcus Vance, who had built his identity on being the patriarch, the man in charge, was nothing in this room. He was a guest in the home of a man he had scorned, a man who held his family's entire future in the palm of his hand. "Julian, shut up," Marcus croaked, his voice hoarse. He grabbed his son by the arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "We're leaving." "Dad, we're not just going to let him—" Julian started to protest. "I said we are leaving. Now." Marcus's voice had a ragged edge of command that Julian had not heard in years. He hauled his son toward the door. Eleanor, looking utterly lost, her face pale and her hands trembling, followed like a ghost. Marcus paused in the doorway, refusing to look Leo in the eye. He looked at the floor. "Leo," he began, then stopped. What could he say? Sorry? It was a word so small, so laughably inadequate for the chasm of their transgression. He just shook his head and pulled Julian out into the night. That left only Clara, still kneeling on the floor, her sobs the only sound in the cavernous silence. Leo looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, he remembered the woman he had fallen in love with, or the idea of her he had fallen in love with. The woman with the bright laugh and the passion for art, the woman who had made him feel seen before he realized she was only looking at a reflection of her own desires. "Get up, Clara," he said, his voice softer now, but no less firm. "Have some dignity." She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "Where will I go? What will I do? I have nothing." "You will go to your parents," he said, "and you will do what you should have done from the beginning. You will build a life of your own, on your own terms, not as a parasite attached to someone else." He took his wallet out, removed all the cash, a few $100s, and placed it on the table beside the damning printouts. "For a taxi and a hotel for a night, if you need it. After that, you are on your own. My lawyers will be in touch with yours, should you choose to retain one." He then did something he hadn't expected. He walked to the front hall closet and retrieved a coat, her favorite coat, a classic trench she had owned before she ever met him. He draped it over a chair near her. "It's cold outside," he said. Then he walked back to the fireplace and stood with his back to her, a clear and final dismissal. He heard her ragged breathing, the rustle of fabric as she stood up and took the coat. He heard her footsteps, hesitant at first, then quicker, as she walked to the open door. She paused on the threshold. He could feel her eyes on his back. He expected one last plea, one final curse. But there was only silence. Then, the sound of her footsteps retreating down the stone path, and a moment later, the click of the garden gate shutting. He was alone. He stood in the absolute silence of his house for what felt like an hour. The living room was a wreck, not of objects but of memories. The pillows she had bought, the books Eleanor had rearranged, the lingering scent of Julian's cologne. It was all tainted. He walked through the room, gathering the pillows, the magazines, anything that felt like it belonged to them, to the life that had been a lie. He carried it all to the large trash receptacle in the garage. When he returned, his phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it. "Are you okay? The tracker on their car showed they left your house. Call me when you can." It was from Isabel. Isabel Renault was his business partner and, he was beginning to realize, his only true friend. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense French architect who had joined his firm 5 years ago. She was the only person in the world who knew the full extent of his success and the strange, double life he had been leading. When he had first told her about his suspicions after the hospital, she had been the one to recommend the private investigator, a former intelligence officer she knew from a previous life. She had been his silent ally, his strategic counsel throughout the entire ordeal. He called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Leo, talk to me." "It's done," he said, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. "How are you?" she asked, her tone gentle but direct. "I'm empty," he admitted, vindicated but empty. "It was uglier than I imagined." "They showed you who they were," she said. "You were right to believe them. Now you can move on. Did you need me to come over?" "No," he said quickly. "No, I need to be alone, to process." He paused. "Izzy, thank you for everything." "There is nothing to thank me for," she replied. "They were parasites, and you are the most honorable man I know. You deserve better. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we have an empire to run." He hung up, a small, weary smile touching his lips. An empire to run. Perhaps she was right. He walked back into the living room and saw the leather folio still sitting on the mantelpiece. He picked it up. It felt lighter now. Its purpose was served. Inside were the blueprints for the house by the sea. His house. He pulled them out and unrolled them on the large coffee table. He looked at the clean lines, the soaring spaces, the walls of glass designed to let in the light. He had designed it for a life that was a lie. A yoga studio for a woman who was a fraud. A professional kitchen for a family that held him in contempt. He went to his office and returned with a red pen. He looked at the blueprints, at the ghost of a life that would never be. And then, with a steady hand, he began to make changes. The yoga studio became a library, a 2-story sanctuary for his books. The massive walk-in closet became a design studio, with drafting tables and space for his models. The guest wing, clearly intended for the Vances' extended stays, he crossed out completely. In its place, he began to sketch a greenhouse, a place to cultivate life. He worked through the night, fueled by a sudden, fierce surge of creative energy. He was not just erasing Clara, he was creating a space for himself. He was designing his future. A future built not on lies or romantic notions, but on the solid foundation of his own truth, his own worth. By the time the sun began to rise, casting long, golden fingers of light into the room, the blueprints were covered in red ink. It was no longer their dream house. It was his. The weeks that followed were a study in consequences. Leo's lawyers, a formidable team from one of the city's top firms, moved with brutal efficiency. They filed for the annulment, presenting the mountain of evidence Leo had compiled. Clara's family, after a brief, blustering attempt to hire a lawyer of their own, were advised that they had no case. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming. The text messages, the emails to the divorce attorney before the surgery, Clara's own whispered words. It was an open and shut case. They were advised to accept whatever terms Leo offered, lest they find themselves facing a criminal investigation. The terms were simple and severe. The marriage was to be annulled, erased as if it had never happened. Clara was to make no claim on any of Leo's assets, present or future. A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement was put in place, gagging the entire Vance family from ever speaking about Leo, his finances, or the details of their relationship, under penalty of a lawsuit so massive it would bankrupt them for generations. They signed without a fight. Julian, however, faced a different kind of reckoning. Leo's lawyers sent a carefully worded package of information to the board of the investment firm where Julian worked. It didn't accuse him of a crime directly. It simply laid out the evidence of his conspiracy to defraud his own brother-in-law. It detailed his attempts to gain information about Leo's non-existent financial troubles for his own gain. In the world of high finance, the appearance of impropriety is a death sentence. Julian was not fired. He was given the opportunity to resign, effective immediately, with his professional licenses under review. His career, built on bluster and connections, was over. The word spread through their social circle like a virus. The Vances, once pillars of their community, became pariahs overnight. Friends stopped returning their calls. Invitations dried up. The family that was supposed to rally around and pick up the slack vanished. About a month after that terrible night, Leo received a letter. It was handwritten on simple stationery. It was from Clara. He almost threw it away, but a sliver of curiosity made him open it. "Leo," it began, "I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to ask for anything, not even your time to read this. But I have to write it. I have spent the last month living in the guest room of my parents' house, in a silence so loud it feels like screaming. The friends are gone. The money is gone. My father made some very bad investments trying to keep up appearances, and Julian's situation has ruined his credit. It's all gone. I have been forced to look at myself, at the person I became, and I am horrified." You were right. You were right about everything. I was a parasite. I was so caught up in the story of us, the story I was telling myself, that I couldn't see the truth. I saw your quietness as weakness. I saw your humility as a lack of ambition. I was a fool, a shallow, arrogant fool. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I am sorry. Not because we got caught, but because I destroyed something that could have been beautiful. And I broke the heart of the only truly good man I have ever known. The man who sat by my hospital bed for 3 days. The man who saved my life just before I tried to ruin his. I hope one day you can find happiness. You deserve it more than anyone. Goodbye, Clara. He read the letter twice. The words felt genuine, born of the kind of painful self-awareness that only comes from total ruin. He felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, not yet, but a sort of sad, distant empathy. She was a casualty of her own flawed character, a victim of the shallow world her family had built. He folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and closed it. It was a final chapter, and now the book was truly shut. A few months later, Leo stood on the windswept cliffside, the air crisp with the scent of salt and pine. The foundations for the house had been poured. The skeleton of the structure was beginning to rise, its clean, strong lines stark against the brilliant blue sky. It looked different from the original blueprints, yet more honest. It looked like him. Isabel was standing beside him, a hard hat on her head, a roll of plans under her arm. "The library framing is almost complete," she said, her voice full of professional satisfaction. "The glass for the south wall arrives next week. It's going to be magnificent, Leo." "I know," he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The emptiness was gone, filled now with the quiet hum of creation, of a future he was building with his own two hands, for himself. "I had a call this morning," Isabel said, changing the subject, her eyes twinkling. "From a man named Marcus Vance." Leo tensed slightly. What did he want? "He wanted a job," she said, a laugh in her voice. "Not for him, for his daughter. He said she's been taking accounting courses at the community college. He said she's smart and she's a hard worker and she just needs a chance. He asked if Vantage Point had any entry-level bookkeeping positions." Leo stared at her, stunned. The audacity, the sheer desperate hope of it. "What did you tell him?" he asked. "I told him what you taught me," Isabel said, her expression turning serious. "That our firm is a meritocracy, that we judge people on the quality of their work and the integrity of their character, not on their name or their connections. I told him that if she wants to apply, she can submit her resume through the proper channels like everyone else, and that it would be reviewed, without prejudice and without favor." Leo looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon. He thought of Clara, not as the scheming wife or the weeping woman at his feet, but as a person trying to start over. He thought of his own journey, of the pain and the betrayal, but also of the liberation that had come from it. He had learned the true meaning of strength, and it had nothing to do with money or power. It was about dignity. It was about holding on to your own worth when others tried to diminish it. "That was the right answer," he said, turning to Isabel. "The only answer." He was no longer the underestimated hero. He was just Leo, an architect, a man standing on the foundation of his new life, ready to build something beautiful, something true. The past was a closed book, a story of sound and fury that had, in the end, signified something profound. It had taught him that the strongest structures are not built on dreams, but on the solid, unshakable ground of self-respect. And as he looked at the house rising from the earth, he knew with absolute certainty that this one was built to last forever.